One of the things that did my education a lot of good as a composer was my decision to also be a violist. My sophomore year of college, I decided to add viola performance as a major, so I got a degree in both that and composition. But even before I was a viola major, my composition skills benefited greatly from my involvement in the viola studio and performing in things like orchestra and string class. And so today I wanted to talk about why I think it's a good idea for composers to also be performers, or at least to give it a shot. Pretty much every well-known composer from the last few hundred years has had some level of proficiency on at least one instrument. Most of them played piano like Mozart and Beethoven and the Mendelssohns, but there were also plenty who had pretty specific proficiency on other instruments as well, like Dvorak with violin and viola, or Still with his proficiency on a number of different string and woodwind instruments like the oboe, clarinet, and saxophone. So clearly it's historically popular for composers to be able to perform music as well as write it, but why is that? One reason has to do explicitly with the compositional process, and it's not even linked to performance as much as it is proficiency. Having proficiency and familiarity on an instrument to the point where one can perform on it is very, very useful. It empowers a composer to write with complete confidence for an instrument or a group of instruments. Instead of spending hours learning from a textbook what is or isn't possible on an instrument and then still wondering whether or not what you've written is totally unidiomatic, a composer has their instrument completely internalized. I could look at any violin or viola line and tell you in a matter of seconds whether or not that passage will be playable, as well as how difficult or awkward it might be. And I could do the same thing with slightly less confidence for the cello. I never ever have to worry about whether or not my string writing is playable because I have years of experience playing those instruments, except for the double bass. I might write things that are certainly challenging and require a decent amount of practice, but I'm well aware of that as I'm doing it. In addition to that, throughout middle and high school, I got experience playing a number of different brass instruments, and by a number, I mean two. I played trumpet and euphonium, and I still know all of the trumpet fingerings and the euphonium ones because they're the same. Now, could I perform on trumpet today? Only with alcohol. And I may not always know whether or not something I'm writing will be idiomatic for trumpet because I'm writing at a higher level than I've ever been able to play, but I at least have some insight. Comparing that to instruments that I have no experience performing on or even playing, like any woodwind instrument, and the guesswork involved in my composing is infinitely higher. And yes, I've paid my dues learning instrumentation. Don't write stuff that goes over the break of the clarinet a bunch of times in quick succession. Don't write pianissimo low oboe or fortissimo low flute. I get that. I get all of that stuff, and I can do my best with that information, which usually works out fine. But the bottom line is that I will never have any way of knowing exactly how it feels to play something I've written for a woodwind instrument without asking someone. And there's nothing wrong with asking someone. Everyone I know is always happy to help with stuff like that, as are many strangers on the internet. But it's still an extra step you have to take to feel confident in your writing. Another reason that I think it's a good idea for composers to be performers is because of the communities that you get connected with. Even before I added my viola major, I was in the viola studio, I played in a string quartet, and I played in orchestra. And because of that, I wound up spending a lot more time with string players than I did with other composers, and the majority of my close friends throughout my undergrad were string players. Now, beyond developing friendships, there are a few ways in which something like this is really beneficial to your craft as a composer. Firstly, you're surrounded by people who hopefully like to collaborate with others and do so on a daily basis. Whether that's playing in a large ensemble or a chamber group or giving comments in studio class, performers are always working together. Every single time I approached a performer asking whether or not they'd like to collaborate on a piece that I wrote, they said yes. Every single time. Even if it was in instances that they or I didn't follow up on, or for one reason or another it wound up not working out, the answer to that first question was always yes. And I'm not saying that that means that that's going to be the case 100% of the time, but I would wager that in the vast majority of cases it will be. And these are usually really enthusiastic responses. In my experience, most performers are really excited about the idea of working with a composer or having a piece written for them. So that's one benefit of being in a community like that. Another is that if you're involved in playing in an ensemble, you get a ton of insight into how that ensemble is written for. The amount that I've learned from sitting in viola sections in different orchestras and just being observant of what's happening around me exceeds the amount that I've learned from score study, because I can actually see everything unfold in real time. Watching what comes easily to certain instruments versus what doesn't go so well in first rehearsals and internalizing what those things are. Hearing a certain certain sound that leaves an impression on you and being able to just look around and see what is making that happen. Having the microscopic view of a single orchestral part that you're reading and being able to discern the details that would be way easier to miss when looking at a large orchestral score. All of this stuff is super enlightening. I can't tell you the number of times I've been composing and a certain memory of some ensemble experience has resurfaced, and I've been able to use those memories to guide my decision making. I'll never ever forget my first university orchestra rehearsal. We were rehearsing La Mer, and we got to the part where the cellos do the thing. And I was just sitting in the viola section in this wash of sound, and it was genuinely one of the most inspiring rehearsal experiences I've had. And I've been inspired to study multiple different works from my orchestra rehearsals as well as my chamber rehearsals, even if it was just to investigate one small moment like that. And I'm really, really grateful that that was part of my development as a musician. Those are the biggest things that I've gotten out of being not only a composer but also a performer, but I'll add one last thought. If nothing else, being proficient on an instrument allows you to create opportunities for yourself that you wouldn't otherwise have. Let's say you're predominantly a composer, but commissions aren't paying the bills. Being able to do performing gigs with local orchestras or weddings or whatever it may be is a great way to substitute that while still giving you the freedom to develop your composition career. Not only that, you can write music for yourself. You don't have to get someone else to perform your stuff, and that creates loads of opportunities. It also gives you the opportunity to perform with other people who are working on your music, which is an experience I've had a number of times. Now, if you're a composer who's tried performing before and it just isn't for you, obviously you know a lot more about your situation than I do. The point of this video is not to say that every composer needs to also be a performer. I don't think that at all. I just have benefited a lot from the performing side of my career, and I wanted to share that with y'all so that you might consider it if you haven't before. And if you're considering getting into performance and you're trying to decide on an instrument, the Viola Gang is a friendly place to be. Obviously play whatever you want, unless it doesn't read alto clef. But I will say that a lot of the opportunities that I discussed in this video were contingent on my choice of instrument being something that is pretty much always in an orchestra or in a pretty typical chamber ensemble like the string quartet or whatever. A lot of the benefits that I've had would not exist if I played something like the piano, which has its own set of benefits to it, of course. But from my perspective, a lot of the things that I've experienced were because of my involvement with specifically ensembles. Okay, so I hope this was helpful. As always, please let me know if you have any questions in the comments, and I'd also love to know what your experience with performance is. What instruments you either play or have been interested in playing, and what it's done for you as a composer. Let me know, like and subscribe if you want, and I'll see you soon.